Gideon growled. You are going to attack an innocent ship. Hara wasn't sure yet what she was going to do. One thing was sure, she would do everything to keep her crew safe. I don't know, but I'm going to be there and I'll make my choices as they come along. Gideon looked dark. Hara touched his arm. I swear I'll only attack if they are the villain. If they are innocent, I'll leave them alone. We'll do what Talon suggested and run. We'll pick up Upa and make him come along and we will disappear to the other side of the world and the Rosh can go stuff themselves. Gideon's look was still dark, but he was now thoughtful. He said after a long moment. You swear? Yes. I'm not a murderer. But she had been the cause of deaths. Nikolai was almost assuredly dead from that explosion and she had known Kale was killed in the skirmish. She had known that was his fate when she had left him to Talon. She might not have blown up the boiler on the weapon or put the knife in Kale's gut, but they were dead because of her. The judge who had taken pity on her had helped her come to terms with the people who had died in her past. That made her more aware now of all the people's lives in her hands. Regardless of whether she pulled the trigger or not. You need to trust me, Gideon. He nodded his head sharply and stormed ahead. She let him have his space for a while. When his pace slowed down, she approached him. He was still fuming. She said, I won't make you kill humans. Gideon stopped completely and turned to look at her. He said, I never thought you would. Good. At least they were on the same page about something. He frowned for a long moment, then said, with the other dragons they never understood that. Never understood I can't take lives like that. Hara said softly. You have killed, you know. His eyes went stormy and she added. Nikolai was in that barn when you blew it up. There were others outside. They most likely died. All our actions have consequences. Some minor and some which are deadly. I was part of Nikolai's death. If I hadn't knocked him out, he might have been able to pull himself out of there. I know when I put a man at the guns that one of those bullets could end a life or many lives. It is never done lightly. I will do everything in my power to preserve life. You understand that? Gideon surprised her by pulling her in for a kiss. She resisted for a moment because she was startled by the move. But she enjoyed the way his lips felt on hers. She put her arms around his neck and moved closer. He stopped after a moment and his eyes studied her face for a long moment. He then said, we should get back. Hara nodded, though she wasn't in any rush to move her arms away from his neck. Gideon was very quiet as they approached the map coordinates Moria had given them. They were a little early, so Hara wasn't really looking for an airship. Hara came to stand next to him and asked, Gideon. He turned to look at her and said, I have lived a very long time and I have realized my hands are not as clean as I had thought. She winced. That had been the point of her speech in Moscow. But she hated thinking of him in any way the villain. Alice yelled and pointed. Their conversation would have to wait. The ship they were supposed to take was coming slowly around a mountain. Very slowly, in fact. She would have said it was drifting by the way it was moving. Hara reached over for the telescope and extended it out to its full length before placing it to her eye. There were a lot of people crowded on the deck. A plank stretched out and the crowd was forcing a man to walk the plank. She swore and focused on the man. That garish red coat looked a little familiar. She dropped her hand down with the telescope when she realized who the man was. Hara called urgently. Talon. Talon approached and asked, what do you need? She passed him the telescope and said, please tell me that isn't my dad. Talon's face showed all the anguish she felt. He didn't hesitate to look through the telescope. He didn't look for long before he lowered the telescope and said, I'm afraid it is him. What do you think? Marvin has been up to his usual tactics. Hara shook her head, but not to his question. It doesn't matter. He is still my father, so we will rescue him. Gideon said, I'll get him. She caught his arm and asked, Are you sure? He knew what she was asking. By going after her father, there was a good chance he would be forced to attack the ship. People might die, and though the ship wasn't completely innocent because they were trying to kill her father. She understood she had wanted to kill her father a few times. They didn't deserve to die for that alone. Gideon nodded his head and pulled away from her. She turned to the others and said, Man the guns, and Alice, you take the wheel. Move the ship how I showed you. Henry would help out the boy in the boiler room so they would have the power to move. She went to the guns on the left while Murphy went to the others. Talon said, I'll help Gideon. She wasn't sure how he was going to do that, but it might be a good idea to have him there when Gideon brought her father to the blazing blunderbuss. Alice asked, Are we really going to be pirates? The thought made Hara's throat feel like she had swallowed ash. Today we are. They have my father, Alice. Alice nodded. She understood family as well as Hara did. They needed to distract the ship so they wouldn't fire on Gideon. Hopefully to give him enough time to get close enough to save her father. The other ship noticed them and she could see people moving on the deck. Gideon had changed and he flew up. He buzzed the airship, making it shake. Her father tipped off the plank, but she saw Gideon dive for him. She saw they had men at their guns as the guns started to move. Hara didn't wait for them to shoot at the blazing blunderbuss or at Gideon and opened fire. She aimed for the envelope on top as she didn't want to kill the crew. Moria Haddon said they had to take the cargo, which was a usual thing for privateers, so they would just injure the ship and hopefully buy themselves enough time to come up with a better solution than becoming pirates full-time. Something hit them and it made the airship tilt. Talon yelled, Go, go, go. It must mean Gideon was back. Alice spun the wheel and they turned away from the fight. The other ship was already limping and going down fast, though only one side of the envelope was deflated. It would be a while before they were airborne again. Marvin, her father, walked onto the ship and waved his arms out. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. This was the first time Hara had seen him since he had left her, and she realized she still wasn't ready to face him. She turned slowly away from him. Marvin approached her and went to hug her, but she sidestepped him. She went to Alice and motioned for the girl to go to her usual position. Gideon entered onto the bridge and came to stand by Hara. Marvin frowned a little, but it didn't last very long on his face. He said, Aren't you happy to see me, darling? You are certainly a blessing and your timing perfect. I was about to be a meat pancake on the side of some nameless mountain. He approached Gideon and patted his shoulder and said, Thanks for the save. You can't imagine what I was thinking as I was falling. I truly thought it was the end of me.